Hey everyone, I'm here with Elliot Overturn again, second time. I know you guys really loved the first video that we had years ago when we talked about oxalates and interstitial cystitis. So today we're here to talk about objective nutrients. This is his product line that has a lot of the vitamins and minerals that I'm sending my patients to order as part of their protocol. And the big highlight today is going to be on thiamine, but we're going to talk about the B vitamins and the minerals as well. Elliot, if you can just kind of give us a brief introduction as to, when you started the company and what inspired you to do that.
Yeah, okay. So we started the company 2 years ago. It was something that took a bit longer than was expected. I didn't originally plan on ever manufacturing a supplement or making a supplement company. The simple reason was that I was using a particular type of B vitamin, thiamine, in a very specific form. This form is called TTFD, and it's heavily used in the East, so in Japan, in China, and in Korea. They've been studying it since the 60s, and this was kind of popularized by a Cleveland Clinic pediatrician named Dr. Derek Lonsdale. So he's known as the pioneer in using thiamine, vitamin B1, as a therapeutic tool. Now, this particular form he had discussed in his books and in his papers, and there's quite a lot of research published on it in the East, but not much published in the English language. So I became interested in this form and I started using it. There's only one other company in the US who actually manufactures it at the moment. I became interested in using it, and after using it for a year or so in various clients with different types of conditions, I realized that he was really onto something and that this product was really good at doing what it said it does. Now, the issue is that I had lots of clients who were very sensitive, or for whatever reason, they weren't happy about using supplements with different types of fillers in. So you have various caking agents and flow agents, like magnesium stearate, like silicon dioxide, other excipients, which some people feel as though they react to, or based on their values, they don't want to take a supplement with extra additives in. So because of that, I kind of run up against a brick wall, in that I thought that this molecule would help someone,
Yeah.
but they wouldn't take it based on the fact that it contained fillers. So really, because it was quite difficult to get in the UK when I was using it back then, I actually decided that the easiest way to go about this was just to manufacture my own. So the original idea was to make a small amount and then, start selling that to my clients. I'd do it at a fair price, and we wouldn't add any fillers to it. It would just be just the ingredient, and that would be it. And as it happens, it became, there were quite a few people who were interested in buying it. And so we have gradually built up and built up, to the point where we've now expanded. And basically the ethos of our company is to make nutritional supplements without any additional unnecessary ingredients. So every single ingredient in the supplement or in the capsule is nutritional in nature. Because what you'll find is that most companies, just to make the costs, make it more cost efficient, make it cheaper to make, what they do is they add a lot of fillers to fill out the capsule and make the capsule look bigger than it actually is. Whereas for us, we have to use much smaller capsules, which are actually more expensive. And the process of making a supplement which doesn't have any ingredients, in terms of getting it through the machine, sometimes it cakes up and things like that. So it is a much more difficult process to actually do, but it's possible. And so that's what we strive to do, and yeah, what brought me to this point.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad to hear that because a lot of my patients are very reactive to supplements, and it makes me wonder if it is those additives. We try to find ones that have less, but it's really hard. I mean, especially if you're buying your supplements and you're trying to watch the cost, you're gonna find there's lots of fillers in there. So you talked about thiamine, and I agree with what you're saying, that how it's very therapeutic. So in a nutshell, can you summarize there's a lot about thiamine, I know, but if you can just give like the main points, and my audience is mainly IC and bladder pain syndrome. So, within this population, how is thiamine how has your research led to thiamine therapeutically? Like, what are some of the benefits?
Okay, so first of all, I'd probably say that thiamine, per my opinion, is one of the most overlooked nutritional deficiencies or one of the most overlooked B vitamins in clinical practice. So if you go through any of the functional medicine training programs, alternative nutrition, etc., you learn a lot about the other B vitamins, B12, B6, uh, folate, etc. You don't hear that much about thiamine. Thiamine is vitamin B1. It was the first B vitamin which was ever identified. And it's generally assumed, even among the alternative kind of nutrition field, that it's only really present in people who are alcoholics or who have some kind of very severe illness. It's very difficult to test for. So people generally don't look for it clinically, and they don't really know what symptoms it causes. So people associate thiamine deficiency with end stage diseases, beriberi, Wernicke encephalopathy, and these are conditions which can lead to death. So they're usually picked up in the emergency room. They're not often identified via functional testing or in a general workup that you would usually have with a functional medicine clinician, right? So that's, I think, is a really important point. The very basics of B1 is like the other B vitamins. It basically functions in our body to allow us to convert different things into different things. So it participates as what's called a cofactor for different enzymes. So all of the B vitamins do this, and they have different affinities for different organs. But ultimately, vitamin B1 is found in every single cell. It's really important for how we take energy from food and convert that into usable ATP. So how our cells make energy. It's important for the brain in particular. In fact, they know now that it's necessary for the release of certain neurotransmitters, one being acetylcholine. It's important for the generation of other neurotransmitters, for the balance of brain chemistry, how our neurons are communicating to one another. And therefore, it's really, really, really important. And I think it's probably the most important, if we can say that, for the autonomic nervous system. And this is really how it links in with interstitial cystitis, I believe. And that is because in a thiamine deficiency, when someone becomes low in B1, and there's various reasons for this, but one being a long-term high carbohydrate diet, or a diet that is higher in refined nutrients. This could be refined fats, this can be refined proteins, refined carbohydrates, generally sugars, because thiamine is so important for how we basically process sugar in the cells, that when you consume a standard American diet, then oftentimes what ends up happening is that you can deplete your levels of B1. One of the first kind of deficiencies which will occur with a standard American diet, I believe, and it makes perfectly logical sense, it will be thiamine. And because it's difficult to test for, it's oftentimes overlooked. So as I was saying, if someone's deficient, actually the main kind of diseases that will present as, or the main systems of the body will be directly related to the autonomic nervous system. So you have a certain set of people who are severely deficient, and they end up with issues with the brain. Other people will end up with issues with the peripheral nervous system. So they may get neuropathy, they may have a loss of motor coordination, strain sensations. They may lose the ability to coordinate the function of their organs. Just to give your audience a bit of an overview, basically the autonomic nervous system controls or is responsible for governing all of the bodily functions that are occurring that we don't have to think about. This means your heart rate, this means your circulation, your digestion, your body temperature, all of this kind of stuff that is always kind of changing, and we don't have to consciously decide to do those things, but they're necessary for our survival. And when you lose control, or when there's a problem with the autonomic nervous system, what you end up seeing is that many of those non-conscious processes start to become slightly skewed. So the way that this might present with certain people is that they notice difficulty with maintaining the heartbeat. There can be problems with the heart. There can be problems with circulation. It can be that someone has excessive vasodilation or excessive vasoconstriction. And one of the conditions that could be associated with this is called POTS, or postural orthostatic tachycardia, where they stand up and actually there's not enough blood going to the head and they end up really dizzy. They get tachycardia, etc. And another common sign of a B1 deficiency is issues with the gastrointestinal tract, with the gut. And this is, again, another really overlooked thing which surprises me, but really the gut is controlled at least partly by the autonomic nervous system. Okay, it's controlled by the brain, and so issues stemming, or what seem to be stemming from the gut. So problems with generating stomach acid, problems with propelling food from the stomach into the intestine, problems with small intestinal motility, for instance. Indeed, like this is, you have what's called the enteric nervous system, and that kind of controls all of those functions. So secretion, so you're secreting digestive enzymes, secreting gastric acid, but also motility. So you have to move things through the gut. You have to absorb them through the gut. And all of this, whilst it does occur somewhat autonomously from the brain, really it can't exist, or it can't function as it should do, unless there are the correct signals going from the brain through the autonomic nerves to the gut, to the enteric nervous system. And that's essentially telling the gut what to do and at what times. So we have kind of the heart, we have the brain, we have the peripheral nerves, and we have the gut. And thiamine deficiency can manifest in any of those symptoms, any of those systems, or all of those systems.
Also the bladder, could it also be contributing to some of that urinary urgency, not having control of their bladder?
Exactly, because the bladder, like your listeners probably know, is controlled by the autonomic nervous system. In fact, you've got the sphincter and you've got the bladder wall. The bladder wall is ordinarily meant to be relaxed while the sphincter is contracted. Okay. And then when you go to urinate, what you're meant to have is the sphincter, it goes from this state of tonic contraction or constriction to it opens up, and the bladder lining actually, or the muscle actually, has to propel or squeeze. And so actually it's interesting, because one of the signs that's been documented in cases of severe thiamine deficiency is, in fact, is bladder problems. So you have two different conditions which are found in thiamine deficiency. One is called detrusor muscle dyssynergia, and then detrusor muscle or detrusor sphincter not this, sorry, I've forgotten the name of it. Basically, one is characterized by an inability to empty the bladder, and another one is characterized by an overactive bladder. Okay,
Interesting. So
both.
That's so repeat that one more time so the listeners understand, because I'm just thinking about how when people say, and I myself have experienced in various times in my life, I feel like I'm not completely emptying my bladder, and you can actually, urologists will actually go in and remove urine with a catheter, and they'll show you, hey, look, you're not emptying your bladder. And you're like, but I feel like I did. But no, you're not. You're having urinary retention, which in itself is a problem, because then you can get urinary tract infections, right? With urinary retention. And then there's the other problem that you just mentioned. So just repeat that one more time, so those listening understand that these symptoms could be thiamine.
Yeah. Okay. So the autonomic nervous system is meant to, it's really complex, this stage of bladder emptying. There's loads of different steps. Okay. And if you look at a diagram on Google Scholar or something, you'll see how many different steps there are. But basically, to empty the bladder, there has to be a tightly coordinated process between opening the sphincter and squeezing the bladder muscle, and at the same time closing the sphincter and then relaxing the bladder muscle. And to do that, that involves branches of the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. They have to work at the same time. Okay, they have to work in conjunction with one another, and it's a really complex process. But to do that, that is dependent on healthy nervous system control. If someone loses control of how they are controlling the autonomic nervous system, then one of the signs of that can be either bladder urinary retention. So it can be that the bladder muscle is squeezing, but the sphincter won't open. Or alternatively, what you can have is like hyperreflexia. You can have small signals, like excessive signals, being sent to the bladder to continue opening, right? So ordinarily what should happen is, as the bladder is filling, you should be able to get to a point until you've got these things called baroreceptors or mechanoreceptors. They're basically designed to detect how much fluid is in the bladder at any one time. And when they start to stretch, or when the muscle starts to stretch, that's when you get the signal that you need to urinate. Whereas what often happens is people with dysautonomia, or people with problems with the nervous system, they either the bladder becomes hypersensitive, so the receptors become hypersensitive, And what that means is that with every small kind of like sensation, the signal gets sent to the brain that you need to empty the bladder. So someone could be constantly on and off the toilet.
And
Alternatively,
urgently.
yeah, exactly, urgently.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
all of this has been identified in thiamine deficiency. In fact, it's been identified in this overall umbrella term of dysautonomia. Now, how does that link in with BPS and IC? Well, oftentimes, this is your specialty, right? But part of IC or BPS, oftentimes it's not just pain, right? It's many of these symptoms which also go along with autonomic nervous system dysfunction.
Oh yeah.
And this is where it gets very interesting, because actually there's some researchers, even just in 2022, there's a very good paper which was titled Small Fiber Polyneuropathy May be a Nexus Between Autonomic Nervous System Dysregulation and Pain in Interstitial Bladder Pain Syndrome. Okay, interstitial cystitis and bladder pain syndrome. They say, in conclusion, there is strong evidence of an increased sympathetic tone and decreased parasympathetic tone among patients with this condition, and some additional evidence for overt sympathetic nervous system destruction. So what they find is a significant portion of patients with IC or BPS also have definitive findings of small fiber polyneuropathy.
Oh.
So basically, if you look at the evidence, there is a lot of research which has found very clear correlations between interstitial cystitis and other signs of autonomic nervous system problems. It's also known as dysautonomia. And then this can range from issues with the heart rate. This can range from issues with circulation, and a heightened sympathetic nervous system alongside a reduced parasympathetic nervous system. And again, I assume your listeners are familiar with
Sensitivity
kind of
to
those terms.
light, sensitivity to noise.
Precisely.
Yeah, I've also seen people tell me that they when they stand up, they don't have the POTS, but they have the orthostatic hypotension with the blood pressure. I had that for a while too. When I would
Right.
stand up, my blood pressure would drop suddenly. Just yeah, I mean, those are I ask those on my forms. So all my forms, when they do the health history forms, I ask for, I have a checklist of autonomic dysfunction, and most people have some degree of that for sure. I know Lyme disease definitely can also be behind some of that as well. But
Right.
you know, guys listening here, ladies, I mean, you guys, they also have, when can I drink alcohol again? You know, alcohol is a big depleter of vitamin B1, even if you're drinking socially. So if you're already low in B1, if you're already using up your B1 because of energy issues, and then you drink alcohol, you could really be setting yourself up for a deficiency. And then pair that with Lyme disease, Bartonella, mold toxicity, which is also going to dysregulate your autonomic nervous system, plus B1 deficiency. You see how this problem can actually evolve. I mean, it's just not one thing that causes it. It's a combination of different factors.
Yeah. What's really interesting is that IC, although it's thought of as a bladder condition, oftentimes it seems as though at least the evidence suggests that it's a systemic condition which is manifesting as pain in the bladder. But what they found is that there's lots of evidence suggesting this concept of central sensitization, as in the pain can actually be coming from the brain rather than the bladder itself. So, you know, there's this problem looking at the bladder. Some people, some patients with this condition, they don't have any structural changes to the bladder per se, right?
Yeah, it looks
Sometimes
normal.
there's
They say it looks normal when they do like imaging.
Yeah, precisely. And so it comes back to this concept of central sensitization. And just so that your listeners are familiar with basically what that means, one example of central sensitization is fibromyalgia. There's abundance of evidence to say that the pain found in fibromyalgia is probably, at least for certain people, or a portion of it is based in the brain. It's based in neural rewiring or aberrant neural plasticity, where the wiring system, which is designed to detect pain in the brain, becomes heightened, and yet the signals which are designed to suppress the sensation of pain actually become turned down. And so the issue in fibromyalgia is that someone can have pain or burning or, you know, these kind of painful sensations, uncomfortable sensations. Whereas when they look at the muscle or the cells, there's not actually anything wrong. Now, that's not the case for everyone with fibro, because there are definite changes to the peripheral system and the muscles and the tissues. But for some, in some cases at least, it seems as though a bulk of the change really comes from, it's almost like they're experiencing pain for no identifiable reason. There's nothing which causes the pain. It's that they just experience it. And what they found is that actually that can likely be tied back to a defect in pain processing. And this is what you see with chronic sympathetic nervous system activation. Oftentimes it underlies a lot of these conditions of chronic pain where there's no identifiable inflammatory trigger. And these researchers, several groups of researchers, suggest that this is likely at least one of the factors that can be involved in interstitial cystitis, in that it being a nervous system disorder. And that's not to say there aren't cases where there's inflammatory insult directly to the bladder wall, to the mucosa, etc. I mean, we know that that does occur in IC, but at the same time, there's also lots of signs suggesting it's a systemic nervous system problem. And I think that this is probably where thiamine comes in. Really, it was just by chance that I discovered that thiamine was really effective for this condition. And that's because I was using it in a case of POTS, someone who had the typical symptoms where they stand up, they get dizzy, they had poor circulation, they had rapid heart rate, sometimes arrhythmia, these kind of overall symptoms of this autonomic problem. And at the same time, the bladder, they had IC, but that wasn't their main concern. You know, I think that was just a secondary issue, because the fact is they found it difficult to get out of bed and difficult to move around. The main thing that they wanted to do was regain some kind of mobility and be able to live their life normally. They could deal with the pain of IC. Well, as it happens, thiamine, I used it based on the POTS diagnosis, and we saw that the interstitial cystitis also started to improve, eventually went away.
Right.
And so, like, that was really interesting, and I had never come across any reason why that might happen. And so I dug into the literature and found that not only is bladder dysfunction associated with severe thiamine deficiency, but also in Japan, they were using thiamine in a specific form to treat bladder disorders. So they were using it in cases where, for instance, these two conditions, detrusor muscle dyssynergia. Sorry, I keep trying to say that word.
That's okay.
Basically, overactive bladder.
Yeah.
And then detrusor muscle dysreflexia, which is inability to properly empty the bladder.
Yeah, retention.
Well, again, they were using it in both of these conditions with remarkable success. So I actually started recommending it to everyone who got in contact. Like we spoke about before, it was the, you know, I was very interested in oxalates, but actually I found, you know, for those people who don't really respond to a low oxalate diet, thiamine is really quite remarkable in many of those cases. I was really surprised by that.
Yeah, no, that's great. I was doing that too. I was recommending benfotiamine and sulbothiamine. There's all these different forms of thiamine, but I was really happy to see yours. That's now only one I recommend now. So Thiamax, this is the one I start with. Let's talk about what's in it. And yeah, that's a TTFD, right?
Yeah, indeed. So this is a form which was, it's not very well known whatsoever. A lot of the Western literature has focused on benfotiamine or thiamine hydrochloride. There's a lot of studies, interesting studies looking at benfotiamine now, and it's definitely useful. But what I can say is that TTFD is, I think it's not very well known. And yet it is the primary form that they use in many of the studies in the East. So
yeah,
all forms
you said
of
it's hard to find too. That's why I wasn't recommending it. I couldn't find it. It was hard.
Yeah, indeed. So basically most of all thiamine was discovered in Japan. And what they did in the 60s was start looking or started playing with the molecules to identify which ones could address a deficiency or which ones could get into the cells at a much greater rate. They were using just basic thiamine hydrochloride, and the problem is that getting enough of that into the body is quite difficult, because you have these transporters which limit the amount that you can absorb at any one time, and they exist at the gut, they exist in the brain, they exist in the cells. So you can get a lot in, but the problem is a lot of it's just peed out. So what they did was they actually identified a molecule which was found in garlic. This is called allithiamine. And what
Oh,
they found is that the allicin, when it interacts with thiamine in garlic, it actually, the sulfur group from allicin attaches to the thiamine molecule. And what it does is it provides it with these pretty awesome qualities where the thiamine can basically just melt through the membrane. And so this applies in the gut, this applies in the cells. What they basically found was that you can give as much thiamine as you want to someone, and all of it, almost all of it, is going to be rapidly absorbed. And it's not only getting into the bloodstream, but it's actually getting into the brain and into the cells. Because there's
right.
another problem as well. Is thiamine, it really affects the brain. And the problem is that when someone's had a long-term deficiency in the brain, well, how do you actually get it into the brain? Because the blood-brain barrier is so selective. And so what they found was that using these different derivatives, TTFD being one of them, that they could get it into the brain at a very high level, and it almost becomes trapped in the brain and then metabolized by the cells. So that's the kind of story behind TTFD. I'm not quite sure why it wasn't studied, or why it hasn't been very well studied in the West, at least. But in Japan, they started then using this for all kinds of different conditions. They started using it for, bladder conditions, as I've said, but fatigue, all kinds of neuropathies, different kinds of neurological,
Diabetes.
cardiovascular conditions, diabetes. And they've witnessed some pretty remarkable results. And so one of the criticisms that we get from people is that, like, why is there not that much research on it? And if you go into the Japanese literature, a lot of it, which is not even translated into English, you have to actually use a translator, like an online translator. You see, there's a wide number of studies which have been investigating the use of TTFD. And so, yeah, that is this particular form. It's contained within Thiamax, and basically an easy way to conceptualize it is that it can get a very high amount of thiamine into the cells without the need for a transporter, because that's the main issue that most people come up against when they use thiamine, is that they can't get that much into the cells. So it's a way to bypass that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happens to a lot of our vitamins, right? So we really, and that's why I'm always looking for vitamins that are absorbed better. So is it synthetic then? It's a synthetically made form of
Yeah.
thiamine. Okay.
Yeah, what they do is they take a sulfur group, and then they attach it to the molecule. And then what ends up happening is the when it gets into, so basically this sulfur group it contains a disulfide bond with thiamine. And basically what that does is it allows it to basically melt through the membrane. You just think it just
Yeah.
bypasses it,
Yeah.
gets into the cell. And then when it gets into the cell, it's broken down. So you remove this sulfur group, and you have just a very high amount of thiamine left. Now, the sulfur group is very interesting. That sulfur group contains very interesting qualities. It has mild metal chelating ability. So they have found that there's an increased excretion of mercury, lead, arsenic
Oh,
when you take it. It's not a massive amount. You won't rely on it as a chelator, but
right.
it does have a detoxifying effect.
Yeah.
What it also has the effect of doing is it's quite a potent antioxidant. So you use it as you would other sulfur antioxidants. It's very similar to what you would find in, say, sulforaphane, or what you would find in broccoli sprouts
Yeah.
or garlic or the other allium vegetables. You know, a lot of these sulfur molecules, they have certain pro-oxidant or antioxidant activities. TTFD, the extra molecular group, is very similar in that respect.
So you're getting
Basically
a
a
double
sulfur
benefit. You're
molecule.
getting the thiamine for your energy pathways and neurological health and autonomic health, and then you're also getting a little mild detoxification
Yeah.
benefit from it. Okay, and then there's Thiamega. So Thiamax is what I want to start everyone on, which I think is a great start. And then I noticed you had Thiamega. So what about that one? It seems like it has
Yeah.
other
Okay.
forms of thiamine in it, right?
Yeah. So what you find is when you look at the research on B1, you see that different types, so different derivatives, which were again all of them synthesized in Japan. You have benfotiamine, which we've spoken about very briefly. That also has very high bioavailability. It manages to get a good amount of thiamine into the body. And you also have sulbutamine, which is a little bit like TTFD, although it's slightly different. All of them have subtle chemical differences. Sulbutamine and TTFD provide the body with some degree of sulfur, although TTFD more. Benfotiamine, not so much. But all of them they were designed as ways to get more thiamine into the body quicker. Okay. So what you see is that by looking at the research, all of them have slightly different effects. And many of the effects that you see in the research is not actually due to the fact that it increases thiamine levels. it can be differentiated. It seems to have non-coenzyme effect, as in you take the thiamine from the molecule, but the molecule itself is actually working on some other cellular process which exerts a different effect. So an example would be if you look at beta amyloid plaque in Alzheimer's, benfotiamine has been shown to have great effects at reducing that plaque.
Oh,
Okay. It's also very good for protecting against certain toxins, which again can't necessarily be put down to the fact that it contains thiamine. It's having like a pleiotropic effect, or it's having
yeah,
like an indirect effect.
yeah.
You see this for all the different forms. So what you see is that as people start working up, or as they start using thiamine clinically, someone an example might be I've got several clients at the moment who are using benfotiamine for their peripheral neuropathy. Benfotiamine is very good for the periphery in terms of diabetic complications, in terms of chronic pain from small fiber neuropathy or other types of neuropathy. And is very good for kind of, it seems to be good for improving the energy metabolism in muscles. TTFD, on the other hand, again, very good at getting into the brain, and it has a particular kind of ability to reset the autonomic nervous system, or improve the way that the signals are getting sent from the lower brain to the rest of the body. Sulbutamine, again, it has a very interesting effect on certain neurotransmitters. It's dopaminergic. It also has anti-inflammatory effects from certain toxins. So you see different effects for different things. So in Thiamega, what we've done is we've provided a mixture of 4 different forms. There's basic thiamine hydrochloride, there's benfotiamine, sulbutamine, and TTFD. And the concept behind that is to get all of those added benefits from, the non-coenzyme effects, whilst providing the body with different forms. Some people respond better to one form than they do another form. So the concept is if you use all of them, you should be able to derive some benefit as compared to just using one.
So, can someone overdose on this? I mean, is there a toxicity? I know they're water soluble, and I know you do need to have magnesium and other things to assist in utilizing it properly, because I know they're antagonists, right? The magnesium and the thiamine can be antagonists. So, obviously, that's why you have the minerals. We can talk about that in a minute. Right? Is that the mineral supplement that you have, a Cystitis, is going to help use the thiamine?
Yeah, right. So basically, there's no known toxicity of thiamine. There is, well, I say toxicity. There's an established lethal dose for all of them, although it's very high. It's way beyond anything that you would be able to consume in one sitting. It's like 25 grams
Oh,
in one sitting for TTFD. It's like 60 grams for benfotiamine. It's like 100 grams or something like that, or a kg or something of thiamine hydrochloride. So basically, for all practical means and purposes, it's non-toxic. There are some people who take several hundred milligrams per day. That's normal. Whereas going up, there's some people with fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome that notice that or Parkinson's or MS, who notice that they achieve symptomatic remission using thousands of milligrams. So some people are
oh,
taking 1,000, 2,000, even 3,000 milligrams. There's some studies done on fibromyalgia and Parkinson's using 2,500 milligrams. Basically, you can go very high with this. So the toxicity is not a problem. One of the main issues starting off with thiamine, if someone thinks that they have a problem with thiamine metabolism, or they think that they need more of it, then really one of the main issues is going to be nutritional interactions. So what that means is basically, if you think of what thiamine is, or if you imagine thiamine is helping you turn certain cogs, okay, in your cells. So when you make energy, there's lots of different cycles embedded within different cycles, and they all interact. So when you speed up one process, you also have an indirect effect or a direct effect on other processes. And so when you take thiamine, think of it, it's been described by Lonsdale Mars as basically the gateway to energy metabolism. The reason is because it sits at certain stages where if you don't have enough of it, then the rate at which your cell makes energy slows right down. So when you take B1, you can speed up the entire energy production process. And that means that what you're likely doing is you can enhance the requirement for other B vitamins. You increase the demand. And that's the same for magnesium, for instance. So every almost every process that thiamine is needed for, magnesium is also needed for. So for instance, if you take thiamine, you increase the requirement for magnesium. If you take thiamine, you increase the requirement for certain other B vitamins as well, particularly B2, B5. One could say also the methylation related nutrients. So the concept behind like a basic thiamine protocol would involve, if you're using a type of thiamine, which is particularly when you're using it in high doses, you want to try to hit all of the potential bases that you could throw out. So there's this concept of the paradoxical reaction. When someone starts using thiamine in a higher dose for something like IC or ICBPS, the therapeutic dose ranges, if we're talking about TTFD, Thiamax, ranges anywhere from 200 milligrams to say 500 milligrams per day.
Okay.
But what you often find is that people develop what's called a paradoxical reaction when they first start it. And one of the reasons I think for this is because it's enhancing or increasing the demand for other nutrients they don't have in place. So one of the best ways to kind of mitigate that or reduce the negative symptoms that you develop when you start taking thiamine is by going very slowly, but also by trying to provide all of the nutritional cofactors, so all the B vitamins in some kind of a B complex, and then also the minerals that have a direct interaction with thiamine. So the two main ones being magnesium, but also what I found is potassium. One of the reasons for this can be is that if someone's cells have been in kind of like a dormant state for a long time, I say dormant, cells are never really dormant, but let's say that their metabolic activity has been slowed down.
They're lazy. Yeah.
Okay, if someone's cells have been lazy,
yeah,
then when you start taking thiamine, if that's something that the cell needed, then you get the shift from this kind of dormant or catabolic state where you're breaking things down to derive energy actually towards a more anabolic state. This means that you actually now have the resources to start building things. And what this means is you're increasing the demand, as I said, not only for the B vitamins, potentially some of the amino acids, but also for the electrolytes. And this is really key. And I think one of the reasons for people's kind of symptoms that they get when they start thiamine they don't like, sometimes it can be a rapid heart rate, can be thirst, can be frequent urination. Some of these signs can match them with a potassium deficiency. Now, if your listeners know anything about kind of methylation, the general advice for anyone in that field of work who says, as you're starting on methylation, as you start taking methylated B12 and folate, you need to add in electrolytes, because what methylation does is it actually initiates the process of building up cells. And for that, you need a bunch of electrolytes. Well, the same thing I think is happening when you start taking thiamine, because you start building stuff. What that's ultimately doing is increasing the demand for everything across the board.
Makes sense. I start everyone on the hair tissue mineral analysis. That's the first test I review. I run a bunch of other tests, but that's the first one in the protocol we always start with, which everyone always kind of grumbles. Why are we going so slow? You can't go fast, okay? There's a reason behind all this. So we go with the hair, the minerals. So we always start with minerals based on the hair tests, custom mineral blend that we do. I use this custom blend that I get from this vendor, and we'll do that for at least, a couple of months before, we even start some of these. So it's really good to hear that based on what you're saying, that was a good strategy, because we're getting a lot of the cofactors and we're kind of, rebalancing everything so that we're not pushing the energy pathways too quickly. Because what I think also, and I remember Monique Attinger, Loax coach, had mentioned, and I had asked her about why sometimes people start oxalate dumping when they start taking some of these minerals and vitamins. And it could be that speeding up the energy pathways could be speeding up excretion of oxalates out of the body.
Yeah, indeed. I think there's got to be a metabolic link. There has to be a link between the energetic status of the cell and protection against or ability to process oxalate. And this is something which I find interesting as well, is that, this concept, again, a little bit off topic, but I'm in complete agreement, although I can't find any direct evidence of it. I believe it to be true, is that a healthy person, someone with robust, not only gut health, because there's a mechanistic tie there, but let's say robust cell energy metabolism, I believe just intuitively and from what I've seen that they have a certain ability to protect against oxalate formation in the body, against oxalate deposition in cells. It's almost as though the the rate of energy or the amount of resources a cell has not only is preventative against oxalate oxalate deposition, but at the same time, like you just said, and like Monique said, excellent point, is that when you start providing the cell with what it needs, when it starts functioning as it should do, it can start processing the stuff that is basically put to the side. One of those being oxalate, and actually enhancing excretion, actually saying, yeah, we can get rid of it from the body now. We have the resources to cope with the inflammatory burden that's going to happen. We have the resources to cope with this. And so that's very interesting, in that there's this concept that when you take thiamine, for instance, and this is really, really, really common, people who take TTFD, so what's in Thiamax, people who take TTFD are noticing major oxalate dumping. And again, what's the mechanistic tie? There's a mild link between endogenous oxalate synthesis in the liver and thiamine deficiency. But I do not think that everyone who takes thiamine is actually putting the brakes on endogenous synthesis. I think what it is like you just said, what they're doing, their cells can actually start excreting it. So excellent point. That's a really good point.
I mean, that's just one of the reasons why I'm such a stickler with going slow, because some of the patients, they just want to heal faster. So they start taking their supplements. I'm like, no, we're going really slow. There's a reason behind this, because I don't want you to be hospitalized or in bed because you're now dumping. And once the dumping starts, for some people, it's very hard to shut it off. So slow is the way to go. Okay, that's going to be the new rhyme. So Thiamega, okay, so we talked about that. And then I know we talked a little bit about the non-methylated Bs before our call, but if you want to talk a little bit about, what's going on with that, and what was your premise behind that formula?
Yeah, okay, so you're referring to one of the B complexes that we make. We make two. We make a methylated one, and we make a non-methylated one. That's thiavite, it's called. Now, that doesn't contain, it contains a bunch of the B vitamins, contains a little bit of Thiamax. It also contains some CDB choline, but it doesn't contain methylfolate, and it doesn't contain methyl B12. And instead, what it contains is calcium folinate, otherwise known as folinic acid. And then it also contains adenylyl cobalamin, hydroxycobalamin.
Oh, it's got both. That's good.
Let me just check. Sorry, I formulated it a while ago and I don't take it. Let me just have a look. I think it's hydroxycobalamin. But yeah, okay, here we go. So yeah, it's folinic acid. And what else did I put in it?
I'll share. Let me share.
Yeah, hydroxycobalamin.
So this is his website, just so you guys see. So this is where I send everyone to buy the products. And so here is the one we were just talking about. There's your Thiamax, okay? And then the Thiamega was the second one we talked about. So now he's got the two Bs here. So this is the one that is got the, where is it? Oh, it's got biotin. It's got some B6, B5, niacinamide. All right. So it's pretty riboflavin. What do we say? Oh, let me click here. See, what am I missing here? It's got, oh, hydroxycobalamin. Yeah, that's a really good form of B12. Yeah. So that's good.
Right. So the concept is, the reason why I made that is because, again, it's kind of comes back to my own clinical experience, right? In that I make the supplements that I think my clients would benefit from. It's not necessarily because I think it would sell better. It's just because there's a bunch of people and there's a demand for something that's not available. Like I said before, if you look at most B complexes, they do contain some kind of fillers, or they contain super high doses of some really potent B vitamins, which people oftentimes, when they're chronically sick, let's say like we were talking about before the call, they have Lyme disease, they have some other kind of multi-system illness, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, cell danger response kind of thing. They tend to be super sensitive to stuff. And one of the things that you find is that when you work with these people, as you know, is that actually when you provide them with methylated forms of B vitamins, it can either have two effects. One is they get super jittery and energized, and a little bit too energized, so they feel kind of like a nervous tension. Sometimes they get insomnia, they get palpitations, they get super anxious. So there's that kind of person who gets really revved up, or there's another kind of person where it increases their pain. It increases their symptoms, they start feeling absolutely fatigued. It wipes them out completely. And so it like exacerbates certain people's symptoms, and other people, it makes them feel super wired. There's various kind of theories for why this might happen. There's the concept, like we were discussing before, this concept of over-methylation. If someone, for instance, already has high levels of SAMe, for instance, and yet what you're doing is you're giving methylated B vitamins, what that's going to do is speed up methylation. You're going to end up with too much SAMe, and therefore you're going to end up hypermethylating. And one of the things that that can cause is this hyper anxious state where you're generating tons of neurotransmitters. You can't break them down. You can't clear them. You were discussing the concept of histamine. There's also the concept of, methylation is one of the things really primarily in the liver is important. Methylation is responsible for packaging up toxins and carrying them out of the body. It's responsible for building up cells. It's responsible for doing all kinds of weird and wonderful stuff that.
But remember, the pathogens are stealing it. So when we're in that cell danger response that we said earlier, you're actually shutting down methylation. So that's actually protective. And so am I logically thinking, why am I going to methylate someone who's in cell danger response? Because I feel like that's going to probably worsen, their health, because that you're giving the pathogen what it's looking for, and if your body's shutting it down for a reason, then maybe that there's an evolutionary reason behind it. So why give them methylated vitamins when they're still highly inflamed? I think once that calms down, you go off of the cell danger, you can start to do those vitamins. But I think I mean, this is just my conjecture. I think that you shouldn't be giving methylated vitamins early in the game when someone's very, very, very sick. But
yeah, that's an excellent point. Like you were talking about in Neil Nathan's book, he talks about his clinical experience. People who, really sick, they tend to respond really poorly to these vitamins based on Navio's theory of cell danger response, which, like you just said, the cell intentionally, although it's just a theory, it makes a lot of sense. The cell intentionally turns off methylation for various reasons. One of them being, to limit the availability of methyl groups for pathogens.
Yeah.
And so if your body intelligence has intentionally turned something down, then you coming along giving a bunch of methyl groups, which you do get to some extent from food. It's not like you don't get methylated folate. You can get methylfolate in food. You can get methyl B12 in food. So it's not like you're not getting it. It's just that when you give a massive dose, thousands of times the RDA, that's potentially going to have a negative effect. And I don't know the exact mechanism behind it. Maybe there's several mechanisms, but in certain people, a lot of people, they get increased pain and worsening symptoms. So the concept is that if you give hydroxycobalamin, hydroxycobalamin, type of B12, requires a little bit more processing. However, the body will convert it into adenylyl or methyl based on demand. Yeah. And that's the positive thing. Although it may not be in its active form immediately, there's a lot of evidence to say that the body does process it very effectively. Yeah. And what it will do is it will partition what it needs at what given time. So you're giving basically the raw building block for active B12, and the body will decide, okay, I need this methyl B12 or I need this adenosylcobalamin.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah.
No, I like that.
Same thing as folinic acid. Folinic acid, again, it's different to folic acid, completely different thing. It's one of the stages of like the folate pathway. Basically, your body can take it and it can methylate it if it needs to, right? It can make methylfolate. So it's not like you're giving something completely different. It's like you're giving something which is a precursor for methylfolate, but also it might not want to do that. So rather than forcing the body to do something as in methylation, you're forcing the body, you're giving it a bunch of methyl groups. You give your body some degree of freedom in terms of deciding what it needs and at what times. That's the concept behind giving those forms.
Yeah, and that's genetics does play a big role in that. And for those listening who actually worked with me before, you guys know I talk a lot about fish oil. It's just kind of a similar concept. If you eat fish, you've got the raw material, which is that linoleic acid, and then the downstream effects of that are your DHA, EPA. Sometimes people go straight for the EPA, DHA. If they're not converting, you can test. There's ways to test to see if you can do an omega check to see if you're actually converting properly. But I think it's very similar in that thinking is it's always better to go with the precursor and try to support the pathways. And if you have methylation, sorry, if you have genetic polymorphisms, which we can test for, then, you know, we can talk then. I don't usually do genetic testing right off the bat. Generally, I like to do that later, like start the healing process, try different supplements, change your diet around, and then we can look at genetics to see what other things could be affected. And there are several people who have, you know, polymorphisms in the methylation cycle. But even with that, I still am very careful when it comes to methylated B vitamins with my patients, especially early in the game. So I am very glad that you have it's called the what is the name of that supplement? The non-methylated one. It's called
Thiamine.
Thiamine. Okay. And then you have Thiactive. So that is the methylated. I see that's relatively new, right? A new product on your line.
Yeah, that's true. That's more that is more popular. People like methylated B vitamins. Again, I think for the majority of people, it can work either way, right? So they can take either. For instance, in myself, I can take Thiactive B, or I can take Thiavite, and I don't notice any difference whatsoever. But I generally don't have issues with methylation, you know, that's fine for me.
Yeah.
So for the majority of people, they can take either one. The sensitive individuals, you don't want them taking this one. Otherwise, there's a lot of people at the same time who benefit from taking methylated B vitamins. If their issue is not necessarily that they've intentionally downregulated methylation, but rather that they have some kind of polymorphism, which means that they benefit from taking the methylated forms,
right,
then again, they're going to benefit from that. So the concept behind taking these B complexes was really to complement the thiamine protocol. So if you're using B1, you want to make sure that you can get enough of the other Bs. And what I did was I formulated it so that the amount of vitamin that you would be getting, or of the different B vitamins, is somewhat complementary to its interaction with thiamine. So for instance, a biotin, there seems to be an interaction there in that to get thiamine into cells or to use it, again, the protein which is involved there is responsive to biotin. A lot of the people who are low in thiamine, oftentimes they also respond quite nicely to a higher level of biotin. Biotin, there's a lot less people who are going to be very sensitive to that. So it's quite high dose. It's 500 micrograms per cap, which is a lot higher than you would find in other B complexes.
yeah.
It's not in the milligram range, but it's also a good amount of biotin. And then what we also did was added 2 other forms of thiamine for people who just wanted to take the B complex. So it also contains benfotiamine and CTFD. And as all of our products, there's no other fillers. There's no additional ingredients.
I see that. And then you also have the calcium folate and the methylfolate. So, and there's not a lot of methylfolate actually. So that's actually good, because some of these products have like 800 micrograms of methylfolate.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the thing. Like, someone can take, the thing is, the way that we did it was that you could take 2 of these per day and you would reach, you know, a higher dose, but you'd also take 1. So we tried to give some kind of freedom as to how many capsules each person could take. And yeah, like you said, in this one, I added the calcium folate as well as the methylfolate, and also the adenosylcobalamin and methylcobalamin. So it's not just methylated forms, because you're hitting all bases there, I think.
I like that, because sometimes somebody might be, you know, benefiting from having the adenosylcobalamin. And so you're kind of hitting, like you said, hitting all your bases, just like you said. Yeah. So that's awesome. All right. And then you have the minerals. And that, let's talk about that. Let me just bring that up here to the for people who want to assist their thiamine. It's called Thiassist. So let me screen share that one. All right, so tell me a little bit about this. Oh, I think you're muted.
Sorry, as you've probably seen, all of our products start with Thigh, and that's basically because everything we've made up to this point is really just based on thiamine. So people who, you know, are using thiamine clinically, I mean, these can be used aside from it. The B complex can be used by itself. The mineral powder can be used by itself. However, this is not, I want to stress, this is not a multi-mineral. You know, this is not, it doesn't provide copper. It doesn't provide zinc.
Yeah, correct.
Basically, what this is based on is my research into the direct interactions when someone is deficient in thiamine, or when someone takes thiamine, what they need to look at. So for instance, all it contains magnesium in 2 different forms. contains potassium, molybdenum, quite a high dose of molybdenum if you take two scoops, selenium, and manganese. So all of these have direct interrelations between thiamine, or basically they can be thrown out if you're taking B1 and you don't have enough of these minerals. Then some people can develop some symptoms. So we were working off of the example of magnesium. If you take thiamine in high doses, it can induce a magnesium deficiency in some people. And in fact, it works the other way as well. In fact, there's many people who take magnesium and it causes them to get lots of different symptoms.
Yeah.
Sometimes that can be also remedied with B1. So when you take magnesium, you increase the need for B1. When you take B1, you increase the need for magnesium.
Correct.
So magnesium is really the main ingredient in this. But what we also have is we have a small amount of potassium. Generally, you don't need that much. You just need a couple 100 milligrams to counteract some of the symptoms that can be present, because you usually do get 3 to 4,000 milligrams from the diet anyway. Molybdenum is important for sulfur metabolism. If you're taking some of the derivatives which contain sulfur, sometimes some of the side effects that people get is actually that they cannot process the sulfur compounds very well. So what we did was we used this form of molybdenum because it generally works very well at improving how the body metabolizes sulfur, or one of the sulfur intermediates, which is called sulfite. It can help process that. Selenium, again, it helps to it helps with the endogenous antioxidant system. First of all, that's something which does seem to have ties with thiamine. And the manganese, again, there seems to be an overlooked interrelationship between manganese and thiamine. There was some research which showed that you could mitigate the effects of manganese toxicity by taking thiamine. At the same time, by taking thiamine, they found that animals had lower manganese. So there does seem to be an interrelationship between thiamine and manganese. And it's quite a low dose of manganese. I know that there's some concerns over manganese toxicity. It's worth noting that you only really ever absorb about 20% of the supplemental manganese that you take. Some would say it's even lower. Some would say it's maximum, 30-40%. So basically what you're getting there is you're getting some degree of manganese, but I'm not convinced that this would ever be able to contribute to toxicity unless someone had some kind of an actual manganese overload syndrome.
Well, I'm starting to see more people with high levels of hair, which is tissue level manganese on testing. And this is in the absence of water, because we do the water testing. It's not from their water. Is there any other source of manganese? I'll ask them. We can't figure it out. And the only thing I'm wondering is it has to do with glyphosate, because there is a chelating effect on glyphosate and manganese. Could there be some type of, could it be driving it into the soft tissue? I don't really know. Do you know anything about manganese and glyphosate and their interaction? Because I know that does chelate it.
That's very interesting. Yeah. No, I remember Stephanie Seneff speaking about the manganese connection a while ago, and I'm not sure whether what that would mean is that someone is actually intaking more manganese because something's been sprayed with glyphosate, or whether it has I think you were alluding to, a chelating effect, as in it's actually carrying it out of the body. No, I would tend to think that unless it's in some kind of a shampoo or something like that, and that's usually the case with like selenium. But when it's manganese, I've also found it quite high in the blood as well. That's the thing. I found it high in the blood, and also high in the hair. But what's odd is that these are people who generally tend to respond quite well to manganese supplements. So it doesn't seem as though they have a manganese toxicity per se.
Yeah.
But there may be like a wasting of manganese.
Yeah.
I don't know though. But
I wonder.
manganese
It's something
toxicity is
new
not
that I'm
common.
starting to see more often. I'm like, gosh, what is going on here? And at first I thought maybe it was their water. So one, few of them got their water tested, and it was within, it was within the normal level. So I'm like, okay, so it's not toxicity, because they didn't have symptoms of the toxicity either. Those are very specific symptoms of manganese toxicity. So they didn't have that. So it wasn't like they had to go to the emergency room, because if you have manganese toxicity, you're going to be in the emergency room. Trust me when I tell you that, because it's very specific. So it looks like you're saying it might be depositing in the soft tissue, maybe some wasting. And I wonder if it's a glyphosate connection. So
Yeah, I think that's entirely possible. Maybe there's something else which is causing manganese wasting. I'm not entirely sure, but I've seen exactly the same thing before, and I find it very intriguing. I don't know how to explain it, but
Yeah,
I know for sure that yeah, the water testing doesn't indicate that there's a high level of manganese. So
yeah.
maybe it is the case that they are. Uh,
Wasting it. But guys listening, the manganese that's in his product, the 2 milligrams, because that's why I'm bringing this up. Because sometimes people ask me, well, is it safe for me to take manganese? Considering that we're seeing this trend. Again, it's not necessarily it's a toxicity issue. You may be wasting it, which could mean that you actually have more bioavailable need for it. You could have actual functional deficiency of it.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. It happens with lots of the Bs and the other minerals. Again, this concept of functional deficiency, it's also applicable to thiamine as well. You know, it's like someone may not have, I mean, the classical risk factors are diet, so a long-term diet which is low in thiamine. Thiamine's found in most foods,
Yeah.
but again, like a higher level of carbohydrates or a higher amount of refined foods, chronic alcohol use, certain drugs like Flagyl or metronidazole. These are also known to deplete thiamine or diuretics. But at the same time, there's also like health conditions which can increase the demand for it. Anything which, say, if you've had a severe illness, severe fever, anything which increases the metabolic demand for the body, and acute illness does that very well. That can induce deficiency if someone's it's kind of moderately low to begin with, or alternatively, if someone just has poor absorption. But at the same time, a lot of the people who you see respond well to thiamine, they don't fit the classical risk factors for deficiency. That's the important point, is that it seems as though what we're seeing is more of a functional deficiency problem. And what's interesting is that most of the enzymes, or several of the enzymes which use thiamine and which thiamine acts on, are also really sensitive to other things, like, for instance, inflammation, like oxidative stress. Like, they are shut down by things which damage the cell. So it can be, whether you're deficient or not, you can be getting enough from the diet, but actually there's things, toxins, inflammation, etc., chemicals, which stop the activity of those enzymes. They block them, and
Yeah.
therefore you become deficient, but you've
Yeah.
got enough in the diet. And
Yeah.
so actually what they found is that by saturating the enzyme, by actually giving the enzyme more than it usually needs, what you can do is you can displace that toxin and you can actually start it working again.
Oh, that's cool.
That's the concept behind using mega doses. This is why usually if someone has this functional deficiency, which I will say, I think is present in fibromyalgia. I
Yeah.
think it's present in a lot of functional conditions like Parkinson's. This has been demonstrated. Parkinson's, other neurological conditions where you have this damage to certain areas, which causes a regional deficiency or a functional deficiency. And this can happen in the heart, happens in regions of the brain, happens in certain organs. That's not going to show up on a blood test. Okay. And
Right.
the only way to address that is similar to how they address genetic conditions, what are called disorders of metabolism. And what they basically involve is, if you've got a genetic condition where you only make an enzyme, but it can't bind very well with thiamine. What you need to do is you need to give like thousands of milligrams per day or hundreds of milligrams. We're talking hundreds of 100 times or multiple hundreds or thousands of times the RDA to basically overcome that lack of ability. You flood the cell, you flood the enzyme, and what that does is it actually binds to the enzyme and starts it working as it normally should. When these
Oh,
people stop taking the vitamin in high doses, it stops working again. So that's like the concept behind treating like certain inborn errors of metabolism. Same applies to B12, B6, for instance, a congenital, or was it hereditary hyperhomocystinemia?
yeah.
You have to take, like, you either give them massive amounts of B6 every day for the rest of their life, or they die, or
Yeah.
the same with methylmalonic acidemia. Again, they need massive amounts of B12 every single day, or else they will eventually die. These kids, oftentimes, if it goes unidentified, they will die, early, within the first months of being born. So they identified these genetic conditions. However, you can apply same principles to stimulating enzymes when they've been functionally blocked by other stuff.
Right.
So
Like
that's
the
the concept.
toxin. Yeah.
Exactly. That's the concept behind using it in Parkinson's, is that they identified all the thiamine dependent enzymes in the regions of the brain in Parkinson's have been blocked by these endogenous neurotoxins. So actually, you look at the research on Parkinson's, Antonio Costantini did a lot of research on Parkinson's, giving massive doses, and many of the patients actually, some of them, yeah, thiamine, some of them achieve symptomatic remission within a couple of days, and they still remain in symptomatic remission from Parkinson's. There's actually someone who I recently did an interview with. Her name's Daphne Bryan. She wrote a book on using Parkinson's. She was diagnosed, what was it, 10 years ago or 7 years ago. She started using thiamine, and she regained a lot of her motor function, and her neurologist doesn't understand why that has happened. She should have gotten a lot worse by now, but she's actually she stayed at exactly the level she was before, and she uses high dose thiamine every single day. So what I'm trying to say is that sometimes it's not a cure. Oftentimes it's not a cure if someone has a functional deficiency, but it can be used. There was another set of case studies done by the same neurologist, Costantini. He found similar things in fibromyalgia. Only when they reached 1,800 milligrams per day did the majority of their pain and fatigue disappear practically overnight. At lower doses, it didn't work. It was only at really high doses. So the concept is, if you can saturate the enzyme with enough, then you can restore energy metabolism.
Is it safe for someone then to just try to increase? You know, we do that with magnesium, right? We call the magnesium loading when someone's constipated. You'll just keep increasing the dose until the bowels get moving. Kind of gives you that upper threshold of what your dose. They call it the tolerance, bowel tolerance. That's a bowel tolerance test. Can you do that with thiamine? Can you gradually increase your dose and then just start to document what changes you're seeing in your symptoms?
Yeah, that's basically the only way that you can do it. You can't rely on testing because, like I've said, like testing is looking either, if you're looking at blood levels, that's not accurate. It's only accurate for recent intake. If you're looking at functional levels, so you might look at, say, if you know, on an organic acids test, there's certain markers for thiamine.
Yeah,
that's only measuring what you're urinating, right? The total levels in the body might be fine, and that you might not be deficient per se in most of the tissues. However, if you're deficient in one area of the brain, which has been documented, that's not going to affect your total level of organic acid levels. Right? It's not going to, like, you see what I mean? It's not going to massively.
It's not going to move the needle.
It's not going to move the needle of the total pool.
Yeah.
However, it is and can cause very significant changes. So the only way, and this was pioneered by Lonsdale, says, look, you cannot rely on testing per se. What you have to do, testing will identify genuine deficiency. But when we're dealing with like multi-system complex illness, where you're looking at like a functional deficiency, the only way to do it, in my opinion, and what I found and what hundreds, if not thousands of people have found now, is that the only way to do it is by trying different forms. If you think you've got a condition that might be responsive to it, then you try multiple different forms. You might try a combination of forms, and you gradually build up. And what you're usually looking for is to get worse before you get better, right? It's a paradox.
Any shift is a shift. I always tell people anything is
exactly
good news.
Exactly. Yeah. So any shift is a positive. Generally, if there's no change whatsoever, it can be the dose. Really, the highest dose that someone should work to and kind of accept defeat, let's say, is going to be, say, I don't know, 1,500 to 2,000 milligrams.
2,000. Okay, that's the upper limit.
Yeah, and that would probably be of a combination of things, because there's people oftentimes, and I think this is one of the reasons why people try it and they don't carry on with it, is because they might try 200 or 400 milligrams per day, right? But in many cases, the symptoms only disappear at 500 or 600. You know, I had a guy who, this is a bit of an anecdote, the guy who, he wasn't my client, but he was like a follower on my YouTube channel, right? So he saw that I'd done a lot of videos and stuff on TTFD, and he bought my product. He was doing it actually to address his constipation and SIBO and his gut issues. So he had kind of couldn't put on any weight, couldn't digest certain foods. He had leaky gut, had constipation, SIBO, a bloating, reflux. So he saw my videos and he was like, right, okay, I'm going to try this. He did like 200 milligrams or 300 milligrams every day, right? And then he got back in contact and he was like, oh, you know, you're a scammer. This doesn't work, blah, 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 blah. And he actually commented on my videos. Right. I was like, someone else commented back to him. It wasn't me. Someone else commented back and basically says like, look, it was only after hitting this dose that I noticed changes. So he went away. I didn't hear from him again. And he came back to me about a month later and he says, oh my God, Elliot, I got up to 500 milligrams, and overnight my gut issues disappeared. Right, overnight. So
Wow.
he carried on taking it then. He was like a firm believer. But his issue was he hadn't gone high enough. So the key is that you need to really experiment with going high. And this is one of the reasons why we made Thiamega, is because if
Yeah.
you buy Thiamax, it's only 100 milligrams per cap.
Yeah.
If you take Thiamega, you
You
get
gotta take like
400
how many of
milligrams.
them? Like 10 of them. Yeah.
Exactly. And that can be really quite expensive as well. So the concept is if you use Thiamega, I mean, that contains multiple forms. They usually all have benefits. It's 400 milligrams in that. You can quite easily get to 2 grams per day over a certain amount of time to going very slowly. You can quite easily hit 2 grams per day, taking 4 or 5 capsules and seeing if there's any change.
Yeah.
Key is to go very slowly, but generally there's not going to be any negative effects. The only thing that you'll find is that when you've had too much thiamine, what you often find is that someone finds a sweet spot. So for instance, they'll start at like, say 100 milligrams, they gradually work up. They find that, say, their sweet spot is 400 milligrams or 600 milligrams. But then when they go higher, they notice that maybe some of their symptoms come back, or maybe they start getting anxious. They start getting palpitations or rapid heart rate, and they start getting insomnia.
Okay.
Those are like the 3 main symptoms that you see if someone's had too much.
Yeah,
thiamine.
like with the magnesium, you'll have that diarrhea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a sign that you should back off.
Yeah.
And they just tell them to back off about 25% of the dose.
Yeah, or back to where their sweet spot was.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Now that brings me to another question. So when they're increasing their thiamine, they have to increase the minerals as well alongside. Is there like is it dose dependent with that? You know how they interact?
It depends. For some people it is.
Yeah.
Right, I'll give you an example. Like for the really serious conditions like Parkinson's, usually they need a lot higher amount. Now, if someone is taking a very high amount, it doesn't necessarily mean that, say, if you're taking 800 milligrams of thiamine, that you need 800 milligrams of magnesium. That's not how things work.
Okay.
Generally, 300 to 400 milligrams of supplemental magnesium is usually going to be sufficient to hit
5 times the body weight generally is what I usually tell people. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, like, you don't need to match them all. However, what I will say is that if, for instance, you find that at higher doses, you develop certain symptoms, that can be an indication that you need more of a specific mineral. You don't necessarily need to take all of them. But for instance, if you start getting like palpitations or dizziness or headaches, it might mean that you need a bit more potassium.
Yeah.
It might mean that you need a bit more magnesium. If, for instance, you start developing like red scaly rashes on the skin or conjunctivitis or something, that might mean that you need more vitamin B2 or more riboflavin, right? So again, that's when it gets kind of individualized, and it's like you don't need all of the B vitamins in a higher dose. You might just need to pinpoint 1 or 2, or 1 mineral or 2 minerals that actually allow you to deal with the higher amount of B1.
Got it. All right. And so I noticed Thiamax is on Amazon. Do you anticipate the others going to be available on Amazon at some point?
Well, I mean, Amazon is pretty silly in that they don't allow certain ingredients. Like, you know, they banned NAC for absolutely no reason whatsoever. Well, they did the same with sulbutamine. That's a thiamine derivative. That's one of the ones that's in our Thiamega. So it doesn't look like we can put that on Amazon anytime soon because it's on the banned list for no reason, no identifiable reason whatsoever.
Yeah.
So again, yeah, we have Thiamax on Amazon, but what we're going to be doing is putting our B complex up on Amazon, the methylated B complex. Now, what I will say is that we also have a non-methylated B complex. However, unfortunately, due to some issues with manufacturing, I mean, we've currently got some in stock, but due to issues with manufacturing, we're not sure how long we can continue to make it as it is now. What we may actually have to do is slightly change the formula, and that doesn't mean like changing the methylated forms of the B vitamins. Like, it's still going to be the basic complex, but we may need to remove or change some of the ingredients because it's difficult to manufacture at the moment. So that may change slightly in the future. We'd like to keep it on our list.
Oh yeah, I'd love for you to keep it on the list.
But yeah, I mean, we plan on formulating some new ones as well. I'm the guy who formulates the nutrients, and I have a couple things, you know, in my mind of what isn't available or what might be useful for certain people. So that's, yeah, keep an eye out because we will be bringing out new products in the future as well.
Now you have an ebook. How can people get a hold of that?
Yeah, so say it's an ebook. It's kind of like it's more of a document. I mean, it's just under 100 pages. Basically, it's not written as though it's a book. Okay, what it is
Manual.
I it's a manual. It's a manual of protocols, and it's basically written for people who, you see, I get a lot of people who want to book in consultations because they think that they have a problem with thiamine. They think that they will respond to it, or they have responded to it, but there's lots of nuances that they don't really know how to address. You know, like the other nutrients, or how much to take, how to dose it, what form to use, all of these kinds of things. Now, there's not much information online about that. I'm probably one of the only people who talks about this in any depth. So basically, to bypass that issue, I'm not currently seeing anyone at the moment. I'm actually writing another book at the moment. So to bypass that issue, I came up with this document. So what this document is most of what I know about the practical application of thiamine. It's not necessarily all the research. There's no references or anything like that. It's not an academic text whatsoever. It's very nuts and bolts. Here's what you do. Here's when you do it. Here's why you do it. A bunch of conditions which someone might be able to use it for. For that reason, I have quite a lot of practitioners who buy it, because they see people with diverse different conditions. There's one for interstitial cystitis, for instance, but there's also different ones for different, different kind of systems of the body. There's also a section on what symptoms might be presenting if someone has like a paradoxical reaction. If they develop other symptoms whilst they're taking thiamine, it can be an indication for exactly a nutrient that you can pinpoint. So you say, okay, this symptom might indicate an increased need for niacin. Then we say, okay, well, how do you test for that? Well, you can either try it, you can supplement it in a high dose, or for instance, you can do this test. You can get this test from this place. There's also a section on what different test results mean from a basic nutritional perspective. So it does a basic rundown of like some markers on a CBC, CMP, other blood work, which is looking at nutritional status, and then also like organic acids testing. So in very basic terms, it kind of gives people an outline as to how to come up with a protocol for megadosing thiamine, how to address the deficiency, how to look at the other nutrients which might be in need, when to take those, and how to test for those as well.
Got it. All right. And then the book, you're writing a book?
Yeah, I am. It's lo and behold, it's on thiamine as well. But that's on that's going to be much larger, and it's going to be
like a book, like a good. Well, do you know roughly when that'll be done?
Still working on it. Not sure.
Yeah, I know.
Not
Writing
sure.
books are hard. I know. Everyone
Maybe
keeps telling me I
within a
need to write a
year.
book on IC. I'm like, I am not ready for that right now. You really
Yeah.
have to stop your life. My friend wrote a book, and she literally went in her camper and just shut down her practice, went in her camper. She was in there for, I think, a long time, actually, maybe a month, and got the book done. But she had to go, and she had to, all distractions had to be eliminated, because otherwise it'll never get done.
Yeah. It's taking a lot longer than I thought it would do. The hardest part is actually distilling. The science stuff is not the difficult part. Like, it's not, I don't find that personally difficult. The difficulty is trying to make that somewhat interesting.
Yeah, interesting.
Not too complicated, not
Exactly.
jargon, and
Exactly.
actually interesting for people.
Yes.
Like, you don't want it to write like it's a
A journal.
Google, like a journal article.
Yeah.
That's like the driest thing. And
Yeah.
you and me, we probably love journal articles, but we are in the 1% of the world who actually like journal articles, because the vast majority of people don't. And so I don't want it to be like an academic text, although it is. There's tons of references. What I'd ordinarily like it to be is like an introduction, so that people are familiar with the therapeutic value of thiamine and all the things that it can be used for, but in a way that's understandable to people who don't have like a science background.
Yeah, because I think Longsail's book was very scientific and very big. And I think most people are not going to want to read that. So that's great news. So we'll be looking out for that. Well, we'll be following you. He's on YouTube, so follow him on YouTube. He's putting out videos on a regular basis, even still. still releasing new videos. And so, well, this is great. Thank you for your time today. And I am very appreciative of your product line. And may you continue to put things out to help people with, their complex, idiopathic, so they say, conditions.
Thanks for having me on. It was great,
Thank
as
you.
always.